This week in our Java course, we are looking at decision statements, in particular the if statement and the switch statement. To begin with, I wanted to review just some quick if statement syntax. Our if statements begin with the keyword if, and it will be all lowercase, followed by parentheses, and inside of those parentheses are the condition that we're going to be checking. The conditions for our if statement must evaluate to either true or false. Then we have an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket here. And if this condition evaluates to true, then the statements that are inside of the two curly brackets will execute. Notice that our condition itself does not end with a semicolon, but all the statements inside of our curly bracket do end in semicolons. If this condition does not evaluate to true, it will come down here and it will run what's inside the else. So in this case, it will run everything that is in between these two curly brackets if this condition is not true. And again, notice that all these statements also end with a semicolon. It's a simple example. We've set a value for age to be equal to 5, and we do the quick check here. If age is equal to 5, then we would sys out go to kindergarten. Otherwise, we're going to sys out don't go to kindergarten. So because our value in age is 5, we would plug in 5 here, and this would evaluate to true. So 5 does equal 5. If age was set to be 6, on the other hand, 6 would be plugged in for age, and 6 does not equal 5, so this evaluates to false, and it would come down here and run what's in the else statement. Sometimes you just need a simple if statement. In this case, it's just going to check to see if the condition is true, and if it is, then it will execute. There's no else on this statement, so nothing else will happen. If age equals 5, we'll sys out go to kindergarten. Otherwise, we're just going to continue on with our program. If age was equal to 6 again in this situation, this would not print, and it would just continue on with the program. We use relational comparison operators in our if statement. One that I want to point out is that to check to see if two items are equal, we use a double equal sign, not a single equal sign. If you'll remember, a single equal sign means that we're setting a value to a variable. So if you use a single one, our if statements will not evaluate correctly. Instead, you'll reassign a value for those variables. So make sure that if you're checking to see if something is equal, you use double equal signs. Oftentimes you have more than one choice or that you need to evaluate, and in this case we use an if and an else if statement. So it would check our first condition here, and if this condition evaluated to true, it would do what's inside of here. If it did not, it would come down here and it would evaluate this statement, and if it evaluated to true, it would execute here. However, if this also evaluates to false, it would run what's inside of the else statement. Remember that whenever we use our multiple conditions, we want to make sure that our conditions are related. So in this case, we would probably be checking the same value or checking the variable and checking for a value in the same variable. Always opt for easier if conditions, even if that means more of them. So don't make them overly long or overly complex. You should be able just to read them as if you were speaking in day-to-day English. Here's an example of an if statement with multiple choices. We have a number of kids variable set to 5, and it would come through here and evaluate what number of kids is. So in this case, number of kids 5 is not less than 2, so it would not execute this one. So it would pop down here and evaluate this part of the if statement. 5 is not less than 4, so it would continue to hop down to here. Finally, num of kids is 5, so 5 is less than 6, so it would change what's in message to be banana. Note that once you find a true condition and it executes what's inside of that true condition, it stops evaluating. So if num of kids was set to 3, it would come up here and it would check this one and it would be false, and then it would check this one and that would be true, so message would be orange, and at that point the if statement exits out. We do see some common errors whenever we work with these relational operators. The first one is always my trick. I always get these backwards and I use the wrong operator. So remember that with our greater than or a less than, that the caret wants to open up to the bigger number. Another thing to consider is should those endpoints be included in the range. If they should, we would probably want to use a greater than or equal to or a less than or equal to. Another real common error I see is whenever we want to compare values of strings. Now you'll recall that we cannot use a double equal sign whenever we're comparing strings. Instead, we have to use a string method. So we use the variable name dot equals, and then we place inside of those parentheses the value that we want to compare. And we also have another one called equals ignore case that will look character for character inside of those strings to see what values are in there, and it will ignore the case. Of course, we can use compound conditions in our if statements as well. And in this case, it will evaluate both of the condition and then decide whether it's true or false depending on the operator that we provide. So if age is less than 18 or not graduated is equal to false, then we're going to say during the daytime they go to school, otherwise they go to work. So this particular one uses an AND statement or an AND operator. So it will evaluate condition 1 and condition 2, and if both condition 1 is true and condition 2 is true, this whole statement will evaluate to true. Otherwise, they're going to evaluate to false. So if I look back at my other example here, if age was set to be 19 and not graduated was set to be false, this first part of this compound statement will become false, and in order for it to be evaluated to true, both of these have to be true. So our statement will evaluate, this whole long statement will evaluate to false and exit out and do what's inside of the else. An important note about those conditions, even if you are checking the same variable, you have to have them be able to stand alone. So you can think of it as pulling each of the parentheses out into its own section and doing a comparison to make sure that that condition is good. So in this case, our first condition works, but our second does not because it doesn't know what it's comparing here. We can fix that really easily though just by adding the variable in there, and you can see that this condition now stands alone as well as this one because we have the values that or the variable in there that we're comparing. In addition to the AND operator, there's also an OR operator, and this OR operator lets us look at two different comparisons within a single line. So my example here is whatever drink we pass in, if it equals coffee or if it equals espresso, we would run a method called do something really fast. Otherwise, we're going to run a method called do something else really slower. So in an OR operator situation, which are these two pipes here that connect the conditions together, those are up above your enter key on your keyboard. You should see them up above there. That's where those two pipes are. You want to put the one that will be true the most often first. So in our household, we always drink coffee. So coffee is going to be the drink of choice most of the time. We hardly ever drink espresso. On occasion, but we hardly do. So I would put the one that's going to be used the most often in the first position. Because in our OR situation, once a condition evaluates to true with an OR, you can see that it will always be true. So if condition 1 is true, the whole statement executes to true. If condition 2 is true, the whole statement evaluates to true. The only way that with an OR statement that the entire operator will evaluate to false is if both sections are false. Finally, we have a not operator. This is not used that often in practice. We usually try to write the true condition whenever possible, but the exclamation point means that it is a not operator, so it will take the opposite of it. So if condition 1 initially evaluates to false, the not would change it to evaluate to true, and then it would execute what's inside those curly brackets. So it can be very confusing. Try to opt for the positive whenever you can versus using the not operator. A couple of rules for success. If you're using an if statement to set a value for a formula, make sure that you only do your math once. So in this case, if we're making a new amount and we're setting a discount variable, depending on the age, we'll want to make sure that we just set the value for the discount variable inside of our if statement, rather than doing our addition or our math in each section of the if statement. This is because if we make a change and we want to add in like a day of the week discount or something like that, we would have to modify this equation 4 different times. Instead, if we pull out and just set our discount inside our if statement and pull our math out of the if statement, and then we decide to add a day of the week discount, we would only have to change that formula once versus 4 times. Watch for that trick so that you're only doing your math once. Now, that's not to say that you won't sometimes do math inside of your if statements, but whenever possible, you want to pull those values out and only do the formula once. Another good rule of thumb is to not cram everything into one if statement. If you take into consideration a federal tax bracket and an Iowa tax bracket, you'll see that the idea is the same in both of them. You want to take your income, figure out what your income range is, and then take your income times the tax rate. However, trying to combine both the federal and an Iowa tax bracket all within the same if statement is going to get out of hand. So instead, you would have an if statement where you determine your federal tax bracket, and then another if statement where you would determine your Iowa one. Although you didn't see this in my examples that I provided, you want to avoid using those magic numbers inside of your if statements. Instead, pull out the magic numbers and use variables or constants for your values instead. So if you consider this particular one, if I had, before I used 18 and 5, I believe, in my if statement, rather than using 18 and 5 and wondering where those values came from and what do those mean, instead I would pull 18 into a high school age and a low school age variable, make them final so that they can't change, and then use those inside of my if statements. Understanding when an if statement exits will help you code for maximum condition efficiency. So what does that mean? Looking back at that income one, I see, whenever I do this in class, I see a lot of students that will try to put both the high range or the low range and the high range inside of their if statements, and they don't need to do this. This is because if income, let's say, is 1300, it's going to be captured by the first one, and once it's captured by one of the true conditions in our if statement, it sets that value for tax rate, it's going to exit out. It's no longer going to evaluate these other ones. So there's no need to put in this one right here, because we know if that is particular one is true, it would have been captured up here in the other one. So instead, we can really simplify our if statements just by using single ranges. And again, if we use that example where income is 1300, that's going to be captured by the first one. So there's no need to check to see if that value is in there again, because if it is, it would have already been caught. So this is how you can really maximize your if statement ranges so that you don't have to make those conditions long and out of control. Another tip is to let Eclipse help you with those formatting and the curly brackets. You'll notice whenever you type in an if statement in that opening and closing parenthesis, once you add in this curly bracket down here, Eclipse is automatically going to put that closing one down here on the next line. It's also going to, once you hit enter, indent your space in so that your conditions that you're going to have happen if this particular statement is true will show up indented in. If you ever get off on this, you can use Command-Shift-F or Control-Shift-F if you're on a PC to reformat your if statements so they look nice and neat and you're able to follow them. And this will be very helpful whenever you're working with nested if statements. Good rule of thumb, make sure that you test all possible solutions. So get into all of your different ranges, make sure that you're hitting the top value, the bottom value, so you can make sure that you've got your greater than or equal to set up correctly. And just when you think you've tested everything, test some more, because you've probably forgot something and you need some additional testing to catch them all. So let's turn our attention towards Blackboard, and we'll run through really quick what we have going on for the week. Start off your week by creating a week 4 project to put all your Java projects in. I'm going to pop into topic 1 just for a moment. We have some information about if statements, some reading to do, a couple examples. What I wanted to show you down here, there's a little quiz down here where you're going to determine how many stars will be printed based on the value that is set for n. You can actually copy and paste this code right into Eclipse and set your value for n, just making an int variable, and see how many things are printed out. So do that, and you'll have a quick and easy correct grade. You can take this 3 times, and your highest score will be counted. Topic 2 will look at multiple alternatives. So those are those if, else, ifs. Again, we have another little quiz. The code has been changed a little bit, so you'll want to copy and paste that in there. Some practice, and then down here at the bottom we'll have shopper rewards. Again, this is that exercise where when you have 2 components, even though they're still dealing with money or they still may be dealing with the same particular value, like how much a customer spends on groceries, this is the case where you're really going to want 2 if statements. You'll want one to determine the coupon percentage and then another one to determine the discount on gas. So make sure that you don't use magic numbers in your program. Instead, pull them out and you'll have them all declared and initialized at the top of your program. Topic 3 is nested branches. So this is where you have if statements nested inside of if statements. And we'll do a little rock, paper, scissors game with an optional extra credit if you're interested on nesting those if statements. Topic 4 are switch statements. In real life, switch statements don't get used tons. Most senior developers will opt for an if statement versus a switch statement. But you should still know about them in case you run into one of those young developers that think that switch statements are the coolest thing since sliced bread. We'll be modifying our rock, paper, scissors game so that it uses a switch as well. And you'll be able to see here, if you set a default winner, then you only have to switch it in the event that that player does not win. So think about that whenever you're putting together your rock, paper, scissors game with your switch. Finally, topic 5 is about input validation. This allows us to check on the input line to see if it has an integer on it, or to see if it has a double, or see what it has on that line before you actually capture it. So look through these examples here so that you can see it in practice. This is just a way that you can plan for your users. So if you're expecting an integer, but your users typed in a string, rather than throw an error, rather than the compiler throwing an error or an exception because your program quit running, you can capture, or you can deal with that inside of your program. And that will show you how to do that below. And then we have an EF scale project where you'll have some input validation to check to see what numbers are on the line and see if make sure it's an integer before you try to output the EF rating. So that's what we have going on for this week. Again, a help form if you need it. And then here's just a little summary of everything that's to be completed for the week. Make sure that you're checking back throughout the week as you get things submitted. I'm trying to grade things every couple days so I don't get too far behind. Be sure to check out your grading comments and the rubrics for any points that you've missed so that you can make those up and get those perfect scores. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a fantastic week.